Welcome to the first ever Navigating Equity Network. This network has been a priority for us to get started, and we are delighted to have you all here. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Navigating Equity Network and our Ways to Equity Playbook has just come out of being launched, and so we're delighted to be able to host these ongoing networks through the rest of the year, so that people can get more information on how to use the Ways to Equity, some tools, a sneak peek, have a chance to be able to actually network with other people on their ways to their equity journey. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So we wanted to make sure that everyone knows this network is being sponsored by the Santa Clara County Office of Education, the Inclusion Collaborative, which is a department within the Santa Clara County Office of Education, and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, CCEE. And so we are really honored to have them as another co-sponsor for our Ways to Equity Navigating Equity Network. Next slide. So the navigating, what we're hoping to do today with our network is learn how to use the Ways to Equity playbook and to network with others that are in the same process with their districts and their sites. So participants will have opportunities to ask questions and learn more about the playbook from our contributors, and to network with other colleagues regarding their student equity journey. The dates will be every third Thursday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And the dates are there for you. We will be sending out periodic reminders for people so that you will know that this network is going to be held. Next slide. So welcome. We're delighted you're all here. And we wanted to make sure we kind of reviewed some of the logistics in this new world that we live in. We will be recording this meeting and have it archived on our Inclusion Collaborative website. Please use your Zoom chat feature to ask questions throughout the meeting. And these questions will be answered in the chat. And we are taking these questions to actually develop our FAQs. And if we are not able to answer them, they will be in the FAQs. Please mute yourself because we know trains go by and people come to your front doors and there's all kinds of things that go on. And most of all, thank you so much for joining us. Next slide. So our outcomes for the network is to learn, make sure participants learn more about the Ways to Equity playbook, become much more familiar and learn how to access and use the playbook features. We've got tools and resources embedded in the playbook. And back slide, thank you. We have tools and resources available, and we want you to be able to learn how to get more information and support and be able to network with other colleagues, because I think that's the equity journey is not something you do on your own. You must move forward with a group of like-minded people. So we're delighted that you will spend your morning finding out how to support and promote equity in the district and site that you work at. Next slide. In case you do not have the Ways to Equity playbook, you can get it right here and now. So you can click onto that tiny URL, or you can go onto the Inclusion Collaborative website, .org, or you can actually go to the main sccoe.org website, and it's on one of the carousel banners. So we hope everyone is able to get a copy of it. If you would like a hard copy, please contact the Inclusion Collaborative, and you can go to their website and email inclusion@sccoe.org, and we will provide one of those for you, and it's a $20 cost. Next slide. Overview and background. If you'd like more information, we have done several webinars and launch events already on the Ways to Equity playbook, and we have these recorded and they are archived on the Inclusion Collaborative website. So please go to www.inclusioncollaborative.org. And if you link onto Ways to Equity, you will see where all those resources are housed. Next slide. Today's contributors. I am so honored to be able to work with Dr. Erica Boas. She's going to wave so you know who she is. And Dr. Angela Burtz. Wave. Thank you, Dr. Angela Burtz. And Dr. Anna Marie Villalobos. Yay. And my name is Kathy Wall. I am the host along with Kelly Wiley. So thank you, all of us for being here today. Next slide. So highlights for today, we wanted to give you kind of a little snippet of what we're going to do. We're really going to share a little bit about the facilitation needs that you need to develop and think about for your equity journey. You don't just sit down and say, hey, you want to, get equity going. You've got to really have some real intentional planning when you're working on the facilitation piece. We're really going to take a little bit of time at the end to talk about on-ramps to consider, on-ramps to equity within your site or your school district. And they're very varied between different sites and different districts. And so using the playbook, you'll be able to see we have it formatted with on-ramps that you can then look at and take specific steps to. We're also going to be taking a peek at some of the tools in the playbook. They are linked digitally, which is why you do need a digital copy. So we'll take a peek at those today. We're going to be answering questions and answers at the end. And we really thank you for being here, and we hope to see you every month. Next. So I'd like to now introduce my colleague, Dr. Erica Boas, who will take over the next portion of today's network meeting. Thank you, Dr. Boas.
Thank you, Kathy. Welcome, everybody, and good morning. I'm Erica Boas, and I'm one of the main authors of the playbook. So before I get into an overview of the playbook and start talking for about 15 minutes, I wanted us to take a moment to kind of calibrate around our equity. Okay, I just got a message that it's hard for me, so let me do this. Can you hear me better now? Whoever just chatted that, could you please chat? And thank you for letting me know. Can you hear me better now? Oh. Still difficult. I'm going to talk really loudly because air sound. We're getting asked to turn on captions. Is that possible? So my computer is doing that thing where the fan is going, and there's not much I can do about it right now. I've moved my computer so that there's more airflow. Okay, thank you. Yay. Okay, I'll go on then. Thank you for letting me know. That's how we troubleshoot, right? Okay, so I want us to take a moment to share our equity definitions, to calibrate around that, and to learn a little bit about how we're showing up to this presentation, and what thing that we'd like to do. And it's always an experiment to use technology, just as we went through a little experiment just now. We'll be using Jamboard and Zoom polls throughout today's convening to make sure that we have a little bit of interaction. So if you will please, if somebody can please share the Jamboard link, and if you can go to Jamboard, I will talk you through how to use it if you haven't used it before. So there are little sticky notes to the left-hand side, and there's a little square, and it looks like there's some writing on there. If you click on that, you'll have a box open up that, where you can change the color, and you can write in that. So Can somebody please post the link in the chat? Let me see, I can do it. Okay, so if you'll just add a short definition or a long definition of equity into the Jamboard, that would be great. If you cannot access the Jamboard, and we know sometimes that's the case, you can chat your equity definition to us. You can chat it directly to Kathy Wall, or you can just share it to everyone. So I'll just be quiet for a moment while we populate the Jamboard. Okay, I'll give about 30 more seconds. These are beautiful and wonderful. I like how somebody's cleaning up the line. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to read a few of these out loud. One of the things I like about Jamboard before we go on is that you can contribute. You can have people contribute anonymously, and it takes a bit of the burden of kind of being watched, especially around equity conversations. You know, one of the things that you'd of course want to do is have agreements before you go into anything like this, but it's a really wonderful way to get everybody sharing. So I'm going to expand some of these so that I can see them better. Hopefully that helps others too. So we have giving people things they need to be successful, not giving everyone the same thing. Opportunities and access for all. Providing what a person needs when they need it. Good, so there's a timing there too. And equity is giving the resources a person or student aligned to their needs in order to be successful. Great, so I see a lot of kind of similar responses here. Equity means everyone gets what they need in order to get to where they want to be. Yeah, so defining one's own goals. Creating equal opportunity to all, same start. Systemic equity equals removing the barriers for success, participation, etc. Okay, and some of these are on top of each other, so I've just been moving them. Getting every student what they need to succeed. Equity is giving students what they need to be successful, and that's providing all students what they need to be successful. Beautiful, wonderful. And if I didn't read yours, I really apologize. I'm going to move on, and we will have these here as a kind of reminder of our already shared experience here. So thank you so much. Next slide, please. So in the Ways to Equity Playbook, we've adopted the National Equity Project's definition, which is aligned with many of the definitions you just shared. So each child receives what they need when they need it to thrive social, emotionally, and academically. So this definition recognizes that each individual is unique, and therefore each individual deserves unique treatment to get to where they need to be. And I love how somebody also offered that kind of like self defined objective. We cannot assume that if we give everyone the same thing, that the same things will happen from that they will meet the objectives that they want to. Next slide, please. But equity requires a lot of work. And so we say it's a whole systems orientation. It takes a whole systems orientation to doing work equitably. And again, the National Equity Project offers some important ways to think about what it means to work toward equity. So working toward equity in schools involves ensuring high quality, equally high outcomes for all participants in our education system, removing that predictability of success or failures that currently correlates with any social or cultural factor, and interrupting inequitable practices, examining biases, and promoting inclusive multicultural school environments for adults and children, and discovering and cultivating the unique gifts, talents, and interests that every human possesses. Finally, attending to with intentionality the social and historical forces that have created systems that are profoundly inequitable. And this is what we need to do to engage in the work that the Ways to Equity Playbook really lays out. And I want to acknowledge that we've been asked to turn on closed caption. So I'm not sure if that is something that is possible, but I do want to acknowledge that there may be people who are still having a hard time hearing me. So I don't have the ability to do that. And I'm not sure if it is possible. Okay, I'm going to move on and hopefully we can figure out the closed captions. And thank you for continuing to ask that question about the closed captions. So that you have a solid idea of what you're going to find in the playbook, for the next part of this presentation, I will be sharing a high-level view of the playbook's design and presenting some specifics about how to use it. So if you were on the launch call, I will be reinforcing some learning as there will be repetition in the first part, just to make sure that those joining us for the first time have important background information on the playbook. I want you to also know that we'll be sharing new content too, okay? So by way of overview, I want to begin with this timeline to give you some historical context on our work. We started our work on the Ways to Equity Playbook in June 2019 with a period of research, investigation, and ideation, while we simultaneously developed a core group of collaborators who would partner with us throughout. So toward the end of 2019, we moved to an intensive multiple-month prototyping and iterating, drafting and revising period that took the efforts of so many people to arrive at a finalized product. And today, and which is what I'm sharing with you today. So this playbook is collaborative, lots of people, lots of effort, lots of time, lots of thinking, lots of time in front of the computer. So with respect to methodology, with the National Equity Project, who was a partner in this work, they facilitated our early work and informed our design along the way. And in this, we engaged a liberatory design framework, which is really reflected in this timeline. And so liberatory design is a framework that was developed by the Stanford Design School, or D School. And it's an approach to addressing equity challenges and change efforts in complex systems. And it's grounded in 3 core equity beliefs. So the first is that racism and inequity have been designed into systems and thus can be redesigned. You can go back to the last slide. I'm still on it. Okay, thank you. And 2, designing for equity requires the meaningful participation of those impacted by inequity. And 3, equity-driven designs require equity and complexity-informed processes. So you can't design something that's for equity without having the process itself be equitable and really steeped in ideas around complexity. So these are the orientations that can be found at the heart of the playbook. And our process emphasized partnerships. We brought together a core group who engaged with the National Equity Project in their workshops. And these have been named. So we finished most of the writing in May. Communications worked really diligently to get this out, and we were able to publish it in September. So next slide, please. Okay, so what I want to do with you for the next few minutes is just really paint a picture of what's offered in this playbook. And again, if you were at our launch, you know some of this, but it doesn't hurt to reacclimate yourself. So I'm going to give you some details on how you might use this playbook. And also remember that our greatest hope for this playbook is that it will move schools, LEAs, and county offices away from compliance-oriented models of equity, right? Compliance and equity don't go hand in hand. They are really at odds with each other. We need to move toward the deep systemic investigation and subsequent practices that need to be undertaken to truly transform schooling so that all students are included, welcomed, and supported academically and socially every single day. Okay, so this is the culmination of a 2-year project. The playbook is a versatile navigational tool to guide practices towards student equity. It has accessible differentiated on-ramps, which we'll be going over in detail today, so users can honor their unique starting places. Just like we want to start where people are at in the equity work, we want your institutions to be able to start there too. The playbook is packed with tools and resources for engaging equity work. And there are a lot of them. And so we know that. So we want to make sure that we help you kind of metabolize all the tools and resources that are in there. And it has been mentioned, the playbook is available in 2 formats, digital and print. And it can be found digitally online, and it's free for anybody to use. Next slide, please. So I will take a few minutes to talk about our 5 key frames. These frames give you a really good idea of what we are trying to do with this playbook, what we hope you will do with this playbook. So the Waste Equity Playbook is grounded in 5 overarching approaches to undertaking equity work. First, and we take this very seriously, it takes a systems change approach to understanding and taking action to advance equity in classrooms, schools, districts, and communities. The methods are based in continuous improvement strategies and a multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS framework. It takes a strong stance that inequities are systemic problems, and therefore equity is about changing the systems in which we live. Second, it's versatile and adaptable to various contexts. So this is not a checklist or a standardized one-size-fits-all strategy for addressing equity. It is a process-based approach worthy of the time commitment necessary to carry out your vision for equity. And we, authors, hope that the playbook will be widely engaged by diverse users. Third, it prioritizes collaboration and shared leadership across stakeholder groups by flattening traditional hierarchical leadership arrangements. And this we also take very seriously. The idea that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution is something that you'll see throughout the playbook. Fourth, it humanizes data by rooting in the practice of honestly listening to, raising up, and grounding student and community experiences in the work to advance equity. It promotes the idea that all statistical data are made of multidimensional human experiences, that every data point is representative of a human being, and this cannot be forgotten as we look at charts, tables, and numbers. And fifth, it centers targeted universalism with a focus on 3 student groups: African American, English learners, and students with disabilities. Universal goals can be met for all students by focusing on how to achieve equity for these specific students groups within particular contexts. In its simplest definition, targeted universalism alters the usual approach of implementing universal strategies to achieve universal goals. And instead, it suggests that we use targeted strategies to reach universal goals. Universal design for learning, which is highlighted in this playbook, puts this idea into concrete practice. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's in this playbook? We provide a lot of detail on how to establish an equity leadership team that reflects the vision of equity that teams are hoping to achieve. So in each section, we tried to lay out some different ways that you can engage in the work. So every section has an overview. Every section has relevant data and research in it. Every section has reflection questions and tools and resources and a set of select references. So this is a really well-researched document. We were not able to fit every single reference that we researched and added into the playbook in the references. And so we selected the ones that we thought would be most useful and most relevant to your work. Next slide, please. So the Waste to Equity Playbook plays on the metaphor of navigation, right? So here is another roadmap. This is a roadmap that gives you a high-level view of how teams might think about designing a trajectory for equity work using the Waste to Equity Playbook. I want to note that this process emerged from our liberatory design for complex systems work with the National Equity Project. And it reflects the idea that listening to stakeholders closest to the problem is essential if we are to understand how to solve the problem. So I'll give you a general explanation of the roadmap without getting too deep into it. You're always welcome to follow up with questions about the specifics that we've presented on this slide. So here at the start of the process, and that's clearly defined, a core team can be in place working to define equity and taking the equity temperature using some of the tools that we offer in the playbook. The findings from that investigation or using these rubrics or audits or assessments can be shared with multiple groups to hear interpretations and insights on the findings. So remember that you always want to be kind of testing your findings with the diversity of folks that you are working with, that you're in service of, etc. All of this information is then shared with stakeholders who are invited to collaborate in prioritizing equity needs and articulating the challenges the local system is facing. Okay, so communication is key, and we have a whole section on communication. And from there, equity teams work together to identify an equity problem of practice and decide on actions to take. So each of these steps can be informed by sections of the Ways to Equity Playbook. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, we're going to pause and collect some of your thoughts on an equity challenge that you are facing. It can be at your school site, it can be within your district, it can be in your personal life. Okay, these are all connected spaces of experience. So I will share the Jamboard page. This is page 2 on the Jamboard. Hopefully you can access it. If not, once again, please feel free to chat your response into the chat to everybody or to Kathy Wall, and we will collect your responses here. Go ahead and pull that square bigger if you want to, and please try to move your square away from that starting point as well. We may have a lot of responses here, and that's great. I won't be able to go through all of them, but hopefully we can return and really try to kind of individualize or respond to some of the answers you gave here. Okay, so again, that Post-it, or I should say sticky notes, Post-it is a brand name. The sticky note is over on the left-hand panel, and it looks like a little piece of paper with writing on it. And if you click on that, you open it, and you'll get a window to type into. Okay, and I see a couple of people have started doing that, so thank you. I will stop talking again for a minute, and then I will return to the Jamboard. Okay, please continue to contribute. I'm going to start talking. I hope I don't interrupt your thought processes. Thank you for adding your equity challenges. I know that equity challenges are really not just metaphorically keeping you up at night. I know that many of us go to bed thinking about them, wake up in the middle of the night thinking about them, and then wake up in the morning thinking about them. And so I'm not being flipped with that line. I'm being quite literal. So I'm just going to share a couple, and I invite you all to read what your colleagues have written here. Okay, so what is an equity challenge that's keeping you up at night? Let's see, how to ensure our students are right now and even lost within the COVID-19 months of turmoil, on top of the families, as well as social, emotional, and as well as learning hurdles that they are confronted with. And it looks like there's even more there that wanted to be added. It's a lot right now. Okay, this is speaking to me, and there's a lot that you are confronted with right now, and that families and students are confronted with. Another one, representative curriculum, cultivating awareness around implicit biases, developing a school that develops everyone's cultural competency. Right. So these are huge undertakings. You could have chosen one of those and had, a lifetime of work, right, to make sure that that happens. We continue to criminalize our students of color by continuing to suspend them and expel them at higher rates than their Asian and white counterparts. Okay. Okay, let's see. Teaching and leading critical pedagogy. Is this the same as what you said liberation pedagogy practices? It seems like it might be. And I think, yes, there are a lot of connections, right? There are different names for things and they might have slight differences, but that liberation piece is essential. And I'll read one more. How can we ensure that each and every student in our county has access to and participates in arts activities in the school day, right? Arts is a lost art. Arts curriculum is a lost art, right? And so essential to this moment right now. Thank you so much for that. We will leave these up here, and I hope that we can find a way to share them with you too, so that you know that you're not alone in this work, and that your colleagues across the county and beyond are really engaged and really thinking about the same things that you are. Okay, can we return to the slides, please? Next slide. So this is a snapshot of the on-ramps. Dr. Villalobos will be talking more about this later, but just briefly, the on-ramps are a guiding document to help organize your complex and often messy process of working toward equity. And I will just leave it at that because you will be attending to this in greater detail later. Next slide, please. Okay. And this is just to give you a sense of what the playbook looks like and how it's organized. So here's a visual from, and this is the implicit bias and cultivating equity mindedness section. So to you who shared that you are concerned about addressing implicit biases, this might be the section for you. But every section begins with an overview of the particular content area that it's addressing and follows with a definition of the key concept being presented. So in this example, it's implicit bias and cultivating equity mindedness. For each section, the authors drew from a variety of the most relevant or current research on the topic and provided a brief overview of the literature. We think that this research is really important to the work and we want to keep up to date on it. We assumed a practitioner audience throughout the playbook as well. Okay, so as you can see on the third page, which is the largest page displayed on the screen, a vetted set of tools and resources are presented. And they're also listed at the end of the section. So understanding that sometimes the meaning of tools and resources is blurred. We define tools as instruments that can be used as a kind of activity, and resources are usually kind of broader documents that provide information. The tools and resources are the stepping stones that will help teams move their schools and districts closer to equity. And we intentionally provided a vast variety of these tools and resources, knowing that each site will have particular ways of working and certain preferences for certain instruments. So as I've mentioned, in addition to tools and resources, a set of reflection questions are also offered at the conclusion of each section, which we think are really essential to doing equity work. And you can use these at the personal level, at the kind of classroom level, at the institutional level, at a greater level than that as well. But it's really a way to guide personal and collective reflection. And I believe that Dr. Burtz will be giving you some examples of these in a bit. So next slide, please. So one of the tools that we suggest in the playbook is actually a large body of tools. And this is a website that I referenced a lot as I was writing my sections of the playbook. But the National School Reform faculty has an amazing archive of protocols that can be used. We're big on protocols. So we see discussion and activity protocols as a way to facilitate equitable practices from the start. So protocols make explicit aspects such as how long each speaker has to talk, discussion questions, norms for listening, and how and what to engage in general. These are often practices that are taken for granted, and it is precisely that which is taken for granted that we want to make sure we are addressing intentionally, because what's taken for granted is often what's normalized, and what's normalized is often what the dominant culture has normalized, right? So we want to make sure that we turn that back around, that we look at it and we flip it, and that we create the conditions necessary for us to truly engage in conversations around equity and work toward equity that is equitable. So next slide, please. Just before I turn it over to Dr. Burtz, I want to point out 3 additional features, and this is the glossary, a list of equity audits and assessments for those of you who might want to engage those. We have free and low cost, and then kind of fee for service set of equity audits and assessments that you can access. We also have the links there as well. And then finally, I want to highlight the district case studies. So we worked in partnership with 4 districts who allowed us to publish their stories, their equity stories around some specific work that they have been engaging. And these case studies lift up this incredible work. Most of it is pretty, like, they start small and then they expand, they scale. But we think that these can offer a great model for districts and schools looking to do equity work. And we were really humbled to be able to work with these districts. Okay, thank you all very much. So I'd like to now pass the mic to my colleague and collaborator, Dr. Angela Burtz.
Slide, please. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Angela Burtz, and the author of the section on African American students, as well as cultural relevant pedagogy or culturally sustaining pedagogy. So as we begin this conversation, I want you all to think about the fight that African Americans have had to endure in this country to receive a quality education, a fight that has lasted for over a century. So if you think about the experiences of Black as it relates to education, the fact that they were denied an opportunity to receive quality access education, and then when 1954's Brown versus the Board of Education was passed, even having an opportunity to attend schools came with great resistance. So if we think about just the legacy of oppression in this country and how it's not only impacted African Americans, but other students of colors as well, it's important to think about where they are now in comparison to where they used to be. For African American students in particular, they still continue to face some of the greatest educational barriers of any student group in this country. So that's what I'll focus on for today, as well as lead us through a conversation around how you all believe that students are doing in your district, in your school, and in your county. So this section will examine some of the entrenched inequalities, such as residual segregation that result in the educational achievement gaps for African American students. And we will also offer some promise and practice for conditions within the public education system to dismantle those barriers to create more equitable education. But before I begin to identify what the challenges have been, I want to hone in on what the reality and the context is for African American students here in California. So the African American population in the state of California, as many of you already know, has been in a steady decline. And African American students make up 5.3% of the state's public school population. And that's a bit of a decrease since 2014 and 2015. And I have to acknowledge that in this conversation conversation around equity, one might infer, why focus on the student population group that's a part of the minority, or why focus on the student population group that's in steady decline? And my answer for that is, when we're able to identify and eliminate barriers for one group of students, we are able to unmask strategies that we could then also apply to other subgroups. To speak more about the percentages of African American students here in California, I'll offer just some statistics around what that means in terms of counties in California. So some counties have seen dramatic decreases in African American students' population over the past 2 decades. For instance, from 1994 to 2018, Alameda County experienced a decline in the Black population from 22.9% to 10%. And San Francisco County as well experienced a decline from 18.2% to 8.6%, excuse me. And the counties with the largest African Americans and school-age population presently is in Solano County at 14.3% and Sacramento County. The narrative and the story behind students is important, so I want to highlight what I have on this screen here, because research shows that at every benchmark in a Black student's lives, from early childhood education through higher education, they encounter far more significant obstacles than many of their peers. And some of those obstacles consist of inequitable access to quality curriculum and instruction. African American students are more likely to receive less effective instruction, regardless of the quality of school. They experience bias and discrimination. They often attend schools in economically disadvantaged or low-income racially segregated communities. And then at a very early age, they experience barriers to attending early childhood and preschool education programs. To speak more to the experiences around bias and discrimination that African American students experience in school, I want to just mention a term that you all might be familiar with, the term around microaggressions. And it is noted that countless studies and reports that show that students, African American students, experience microaggressions in the forms of racial epithets named about them, or comments about their race that challenge them and get them to think that they're not as gifted or not as qualified as other students. Next slide, please. There are two particular areas that I want to focus on here, and that African American students are more likely to experience exclusionary discipline practices like out-of-school suspensions. These exclusionary practices not only negatively affect student engagement in school and classroom environments, but they also increase the likelihood that a student will be pushed out of school and consequently could end up in the school to prison pipeline and experience incarceration. So if you look at the data here in these two charts, in figure 15, for instance, and this comes from the playbook, but in a different section around suspension rates, African American students with disabilities, for example, are experience suspension at 14.4%, which is higher than some of the other groups. If we also focus on absenteeism, which is also another barrier that prevents African American students from succeeding and experiencing equitable outcomes, they are more likely to be chronically absent from school at 22.5%. Now, there are many reasons why this can occur, and our study does highlight some of those instances. As we talk about the statewide suspension rates, the story behind why a student would be expelled or kicked out of school, or not even kicked out of school, but sent out of the classroom. So there's no statistical data that shows that a child of one ethnic race, meaning an African American student in this instance, has a propensity to do something wrong in school or get in trouble at a higher rate. What we're really talking about here is the role of implicit bias in how those instances are documented and what constitutes as a referral, which then consequently impacts suspension. So conversations around school administrators and teachers thinking about how they perceive and think about African American students is extremely important in addressing issues around suspension rates. Next slide, please. So I want to engage you all in some thinking about what does this mean for you in the context of where you work, no matter if that percentage of African American students is 2% or 5%. I want to start with the first question here, and I want to utilize a chat section and have you all just type your response or initial thoughts. But I want you to think about is describe how you think the African American students are doing in your school, district, or community. In your opinion, are they well? And what are the factors contributing to their wellness? Now, I know for some of you, you might be able to give me a thesis, but I'm okay with a few statements or just your initial thoughts around this particular question. And so I want to give everyone some time to think about it, maybe about a minute or so, and whatever comes to mind, either if you're working directly with this subgroup or you're supporting staff that works with this subgroup, I want to know what are the realities in the areas where you all work. So if you could spend some time reflecting on that question and type in a response. So I just want you all to type what you have. And what I'll do is just maybe highlight a few. So finish your thoughts and just type, even if it's a statement or a sentence. I just want to gauge your thoughts and your experience in working with African American students as I will move forward in the presentation with other content. So maybe if a few of you who have a response ready, if you could type it in the section, I would greatly appreciate it. And I want to highlight that these sample questions are what you could utilize in your context, in your school, with professionals as well, as a part of PD or part of a faculty meeting, or when you engage people in a conversation around different subgroups. Okay. Okay. So I see the responses coming in. Two other questions, which we will not focus on right now, but again, this is offered to you as a guide to utilize is, are there obstacles preventing African-American students from being engaged in the classroom, for instance, from feeling welcome or achieving academically in your school? And lastly, what are the possibilities and limitations for better serving African-American students in your school or district? What needs to happen to do so? And I'll just highlight a few statements that I see here. Someone wrote that they need better base curriculum. There's definitely a struggle for our African-American most at-risk students. Their needs are great in the classroom. It is very important that someone was typing that one. African-American students are few in our schools, so we have tried to bolster our libraries, but our curriculum is not supportive at all. That's a great point, is that Bridget, that you noted, and that we will actually focus on that as we continue in this conversation. So thank you for your responses. I'm going to continue here. Next slide, please. So we do have some resources that you all could use, and one comes from the Black Leadership Kitchen Cabinet, African Ancestry Education Assessment and Research Tools, and they focus on students here in the Santa Clara County District, some of the barriers, but known strategies for enhancing the overall experience for students. So I will highly recommend this resource that you'll find in the guidebook. And I'm going to jump down to focus on the conversation around social emotional health and well-being of our youth. There's a webinar and an article in there that you could take a look at. And there's studies around trauma and the impact of trauma in student lives and how that impact their ability to be able to attend school regularly, stay focused, and then also be able to achieve success. Next slide, please. Culturally relevant pedagogy in a conversation around equity as it relates to African-American students as well as students of color has been cited as a known strategy for improving the outcomes of students, particularly in the classroom. So this section of the playbook on culturally relevant pedagogy, it highlights what those practices are. And I like to say that CRP is a working definition and that this word has evolved over time and taken on different meaning. So you might have heard the concept of culturally relevant teaching or culturally sustaining teaching. The words are often used interchangeably, but the definitions have been adapted to adjust for more equity issues that come up in the lives of students. But with all the terms taken together with CRP, it really comes down to embracing the cultural and historical backgrounds, knowledge, and experience of students to inform the teacher's classroom and methodology. So successful implementation comes at different levels, as you would imagine. At the district level, it means that administrators are engaged in an ongoing conversation, school leaders are engaged in an ongoing conversation around the socio-political consciousness and definition of CRP. So if you embrace the CRP as a catalyst for being able to address equity issues, a tough conversation around race and racism has to happen in order for this vision to be actualized and bring in this curriculum. And that is because focused specifically on African-American students, race and the salience of race is something that's a part of their lives. And for many families and students, they are conscious of their race and in terms of their identity. So to have a conversation to support them, there has to be acknowledgement of the historical oppression that students have faced and also what that means in terms of their racial identity. If we get to the site level, I alluded to this earlier, it also means that administrators are aware of the subconscious beliefs persistent in them, so implicit biases. Thoughts about different subgroups, how those thoughts emanated, and what individuals could do to address those thoughts and challenge them is very helpful and necessary in facilitating CRP. And at the classroom level, cultivating relationships and making making space for students to be able to express their full identity is the cornerstone for CRP work. And that full identity consists of culture. It consists of their socialization and how they're taught about their particular race, and that could be used in different ways as well. Curriculum, meaning books or different specials or guest speakers and so forth, where in a nutshell, students are able to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. Next slide, please. The previous one before that one. Thank you. So in summary, when we talk about culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive pedagogy, it's about building relationships. It's about seeing teaching and learning as a mission and responsibility, remembering race. And I cannot emphasize that enough. We cannot leave the topic of race out of a conversation as it relates to culturally relevant pedagogy. Moving beyond materialism and accepting and serving in multiple roles and promoting self and school pride. So Dr. Gloria Lassing-Billings coined this term in 1995 in an article entitled Toward a Theory of Culturally Relevant Pedagogy. And she later talked about this topic or started to write more about it in her book in 2001. And in her book, she argues that culturally relevant pedagogy, students must experience academic success, develop and maintain cultural competence, and develop a critical consciousness in which they challenge the status quo. So that challenge to status quo creates space for people to be able to look at the inequities in their schools and voice those, and possibly come up with solutions or engage in courageous conversations with teachers, school leaders, and their peers about how to address it. But it also means being able to acknowledge their environment and where they're situated and located, and how that also impacts their school experience. Next slide, please. So there are some tools in our guidebook where we focus on different ways in which educators and people in society have utilized CRP. So the first one there is the Algebra Project, and I'll just speak to that one very briefly. But the Algebra Project was founded by Dr. Bob Moses, who's a civil rights activist and educator. And the Algebra Project is essentially an organization that helps low-income and underrepresented students achieve in math skills. So that's a resource in there that you could tap into, and a potential model of how to address math skills. Next slide, please. I believe that's okay. Here's some more resources here through the CA1 course for the Santa Clara County Office of Ed. There is a class on culturally responsive and anti-bias teaching. I would also end with this section by saying that there are tenets of culturally relevant pedagogy. So as I spoke to the different topics related to CRP, each topic comes with a set of tenets that could be very useful in engaging a community in a conversation around this work. So I want to wrap it up here, and next slide, I believe the next slide. Yes. So I have this poll here, and this is only meant to take a minute, then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague. Kathy, do you mind projecting this poll, please? There are just 3 questions that I want you to answer related to what you've heard in CRP. I believe the poll should appear. Oh, I see it. There we go. Everyone should see the poll, and this is meant to take a minute. So if you could submit your response as soon as you have it. Oh, some people are saying that they do not see it. It should pop right up. Okay, many people don't see it. So for the sake of time, I'll just read the reflection questions in the poll that I wanted you all to know very briefly. Oh, it's saying that you can click at the poll at the bottom of the screen. Oh, someone completed it, so it is up. So if you would still like to take this poll very briefly, if you click at the bottom of the screen. Okay. Okay, so I could include this in a follow-up message after the presentation. I just want to be mindful of time. And so I'm going to wrap it up here in this particular section, and I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Anna Marie Villalobos.
I'm good. How are you? Well, I'm gonna return a sweater that I bought before
If
it went on
everybody
sale.
can please
Hello, could we
mute
please
their
Plus I didn't like
mute
it.
ourselves, please? Thank you.
Mhm.
Are you looking for anything else today?
All right.
Hello, everyone. Are we still doing the poll?
The poll is done.
Move forward
Next
from the
slide.
poll, yes.
Hi. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm Anna Villalobos, and good morning, everyone. And I authored the sections on students with disabilities and EL, the two sections that I'm going to discuss right now. And we are running a little bit behind, so if I rush through these and you want to know more information, I really apologize, but you have the link to the playbook. So anything that I missed, you can go back later. So this is just meant to be like a bird's eye view of what is in the playbook. So if we think about the history of the education of students with disability, from the very beginning, it really has been a history of exclusion. And unfortunately, it continues to be exclusionary within our educational system. If we look at the CASP data for students with disabilities and the college and career outcomes, the data, it's apparent that students with disabilities perform at a much lower level and have poor outcomes than their non-disabled peers. Further compounding this inequity is the continued segregation of students with disabilities in California. They are systematically removed from general education classroom, and this is compared to their disabled peers across the nation. So our state really needs to work harder on working in terms of having inclusionary practices across the board in our classrooms. So the recent move to online learning has further exacerbated these inequities. LEAs and schools have striven to redesign equitable instruction for all students, but have particularly struggled with implementing effective instruction for students with disabilities. Next slide, please. So how can the playbook assist LEAs, school sites, and classroom teachers to address these issues? Well, once again, we talked about the reflection questions that are in the playbook. And what I would like to share with you is how some questions related to technology, because this is really important, especially right now with our students with disability and in the issues of access during COVID-19. So an example of this is, how is technology used as an intervention versus an innovation for students? Is disproportionality present in these outcomes? Because as we know, the issue of access for a lot of our students, our students of color and our students with disability, this is a real problem. And are educators equipped to use and teach technology in equitable ways in their classes? That's another question. There's a variety of different skill levels for our educators in terms of using technology and how they utilize it with their students in their classes. Next slide, please. So these are some resources, excuse me, for educational technology and equity. And these are useful, especially right now during COVID, during the remote learning situations that a lot of us are undergoing right now. So the first one is Advancing Equity in an Era of Crisis. And this is a guide to equity in remote learning. So this is a very good guide. Also, the U.S. Office of Educational Technology, they also have a guide, which is also very useful. Next. These are some sample special education resources, and I'm going to talk about the Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners a little bit later. But I find it to be a very thorough guide in working with our EL students who also have a disability. And also the University of Florida, Cedar Resources and Reports, they recently have added the high-level practices for students with disabilities, which are evidence research-based practices that should be incorporated into classrooms, into professional development, and into teacher preparation programs. So very, very, very excellent, strong website. And also the Center on Online Learning and Students with Disabilities is another resource. Next slide, please. So when we talk about English learners, we need to look at, the context of English learners. So English learners are more likely to graduate at lower rates than their peers across student groups, and also kind of focus on the intersectionality of students groups. So for example, although English learners constitute 19.3% of the students in the state of California, they do not necessarily constitute a large percentage of students graduating from high school and then continuing on to higher education. So the playbook really focuses on the equity issues and opportunity gaps faced by English learners and academics, in instructions, and in long-term educational outcomes. One of the major issues is the opportunity gap in academic achievement. Over the last 5 years, more than 80% of EL students continue to perform at below standard levels, the English, the ELA, and the math sections on the CASP. And then when speaking of equity, we need to look deeper into the data of our students, because as we talked about earlier, we need to really humanize the data, because each one of those data points is a student. And I always like to remember that each data point is a student. So I think to myself, put a face on that. And then we need to examine the intersectionality of students. For example, students who are not just EL students, but they're also maybe a student who has been identified with a learning disability. They also may be a foster youth student, or they could be, or they could be an African American student. There's intersectionality, or students who are of a lower socioeconomic or living in poverty. So there's so much intersectionality for so many of our students that's something that we really need to pay attention to. So this brings us to once again, to that practitioner's guide. The practitioner guide is really good about looking at the pre-referral, the referral, and working with students that are EL and also are a student with a learning disability. It's a great resource, and it leads us through the process of really taking a look at who's being referred, why they're being referred, how they're being referred, and whether or not they should be referred. There's a great section in there that looks specifically at the difference between an EL and a student with a disability, and how you can tell whether it's language acquisition or whether it is indeed a disability. It's a really good handbook. And within that guide for educating English learners with disabilities, they report that for the 2017 and 2018 school year, overall, 12% of students in the state qualify for special education. However, 16.6% of EL students were identified as a student with a disability. In addition, 20% of EL are identified as students living in poverty. Another statistic I recently came across last week was that if the students are LTEL, they're more than 279% likely to be made eligible for special education. Think about that. That's incredible. So the playbook contains a series of reflection questions to orient LEA teams and educators in their analysis of current systems with respect to EL students. So on this slide, on the next slide, we have a we have a number of resources that I would like to share with you. And what these resources are to help in creating a culture of inclusion and belonging. And these are samples, tools, and resources. So what I want to tie this back to the things that Angela and the things that Erica had said earlier to the presentation, because they all tie together. And in reading the chats that everyone has posted, that idea of building relationships, of affirming students, of validating students, all those key parts of culturally relevant pedagogy, all of that is part of creating a culture of inclusion and belonging. And these tools can help in the classroom, at the site, at sites, they can be used across a district in order to build that kind of an environment and to build that kind of a classroom where students feel that they belong and that they are not being othered and being pushed out and being looked at differently. So Teaching Tolerance has learning plans for diversity. Scholastic has lesson plans on multiculturalism and diversity. Out of the Santa Clara County Office of Education, there's the My Name, My Identity initiative, and UC Berkeley has a great website on the Othering and Belonging Institute. These are great resources because they address the need for EL students, students with disabilities, students that come from different backgrounds, from diverse backgrounds. It makes them feel that they're a member of the educational community in their classroom, which is key to wanting them to come to that classroom. Okay, next slide, please. So in summary, before you go on your break, I just really want you to think about all the different components in this overview that we've given you of the playbook. And as you can see throughout the playbook, there really are different threads that bring us all together in terms of the humanization of the data, in terms of a universal targeted approach, so that you may be targeting one group, but in reality, it's something that can be across all groups. So let's go ahead and go on a break. And I have it as 11:14. So if we could come back at 11:19, that would be great. Thank you very much. Oh, and actually I was just told no break. So we're going to go ahead. LTAL are long-term English learners. Someone put that in the book. So don't go on a break. We're going to continue on. Oh. No break, sorry. Okay, so, oh, she went on a break? What happened? Oh, now we're sharing again, okay. I'm sorry for the confusion. So this next part, we're gonna actually use the equity playbook. So in case you haven't downloaded the Zoom Life, I know, sorry about that. In case you haven't downloaded the playbook yet, we are going to, there's the link there once again. So you may want to download it because it may make this next part easier to navigate for you. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and do the next slide. As we promised, we're going to talk about the on-ramps. So on this page, I want to really spotlight the on-ramps. So we're going to talk about beginning and then continuing on our equity journey, on your equity journey. So the on-ramps are a guiding document to help organize a complex and sometimes messy process on working towards equity. As the title suggests, this is a developmental rubric to help you assess and identify where you are in your equity work, early, middle, and further along. The on-ramps were developed using Skurla's and others' book, Using Equity Audits to Create Excellent and Equitable Schools, and also Curtis Litton's The Equity Framework, and collective input and feedback from longtime teachers and administrators. We designed the on-ramps with the understanding that equity teams would want to be able to identify a starting point and then build a trajectory for their work. The on-ramps provide guidance on 7 main domains, bolded on the left-hand column on each page. You can see the domains, okay? Over here, thank you. And they are leadership development, teacher staff development, data and research, planning and communication, culture, and climate progress monitoring. Each column represents a starting place, but the idea is that in order to engage equity processes and practices as fully as possible, you will want to do your best to complete all of the activities listed in a column within each domain. For ease of access, the blue column on the right-hand side, you can see where the little arrow is towards the bottom. That blue, for ease of access, the blue column on the right-hand side links to related sections of the playbook. So you can click on those and it'll take you to the related sections of the playbook. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit more. So when we talk about the on-ramps, this will help you to see how they're organized. So here we provide you a snapshot of the first listed domain, okay, which would be, well, it should be planning, but what I really want you to look at is that schools and districts at the beginning of their equity work would find themselves starting their engines. So you're right up here at the top about starting your engine, okay? And it's what we all need to do when we get into the car. The first thing we're going to do is start our engine. So when we're talking about leadership and development and talking about starting your engine, we're talking about establishing a core leadership team, and then identifying trainings, taking implicit bias assessment, exploring equity literature, and establishing community agreements and norms, okay? So when you're at the beginning of your equity work, you should find yourself starting your engines. This is largely a position of learning and investigating the ways in which their systems, districts, and their systems perpetuate or we hope challenge inequities. When you're picking up speed up here, okay, in column 2, this is where teams are solidifying their definitions of equity, right? They're developing their goals. They're going to start choosing the tools they might use to aid them in equity work. And then beginning to draft an equity plan. And it's the third column right here where the work really ramps up. Here, teams have to figure out how they are going to work toward equity, and then you're going to have to get to work in finalizing your equity plans and starting with one equity challenge. Teams learn and iterate as they go on. This is a cyclical process, right? As mentioned, this last blue column over here will give you the different playbook sections which are relevant to that particular equity area and that are linked to it. Each domain connects to 3-level sets of equity practices and activities that will assist teams in moving their local systems towards equity. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at what that would look like if you were actually doing this using the playbook. So, for example, as Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley has put it, the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power. To be effective in advancing equity, leadership teams must look and feel distinct from hierarchically configured top-down leadership. Historically and now, those who hold the deepest knowledge of systemic injustices are underrepresented in leadership positions. So think about that. Think about that in terms of who is usually at the table in your districts. So the first major decision is with regards to team leadership development and facilitation. Who will facilitate this process, right? So we're looking, when we talk about the core leadership team and who you're going to identify who's going to be on that leadership team, you click across the column that was just done, and we have the information for you on building an equity leadership team. Okay, so that's an example of how the tool would work for you. When you're going through this beginning process with the leadership development, one thing that I really want to highlight is that facilitation piece, because it's important to think about who will facilitate this process, because I can think about it in either of 2 ways. Would you hire someone from outside or use someone from inside the district? An argument can be made for either. Sometimes someone from outside can lead folks further than someone from inside. But if you use someone from inside, then you are building capacity within your staff. So you really need, and that's something that you really need to think about. That's one of the key pieces in terms of who's going to facilitate this process. For example, when we were doing the playbook and we were going through this process, we used the National Equity Project. But you can use whatever makes sense for you in your district. And you really need to think about who should be on the leadership team, because this will not look like other leadership teams that you may already have because of the stakeholders who should be represented. So when you're thinking of the leadership team, you really need to be thinking about, do they represent the school community in terms of race, ethnicity, language, religion, and other identities? Do they represent the school community across departments and groups? Are they interested and curious about working on the issues of equity? Because you may think, oh, this person is a really good, person that gets a lot done, but are they interested in equity, issues of equity? And are they willing to do this work long-term? And are they available, and do they have the time and the energy to do the work? Because it is a lot of hard work and it's a heavy, heavy lift. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide, please. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, so I can't get to the next slide. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay, I don't want to do screen share, I want to do chat. Since the next slide is Jamboard, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the link in there for everyone. And then, oops, let me try that again. I'm going to go ahead and put the link there, and then everybody can go ahead and, it's okay, we're going to do the Jamboard. Yeah, it's right there. So I'm going to ask you to go to pages 3 and 4. Let's go to page 3 first. And in page 3 is, who do you envision on your leadership, on your core leadership team, and why? And we'll do that one first. So I'll give everyone a couple minutes to do that. It says you can access the sticky note in the top left corner for everybody. Okay, why isn't this working? Huh. Kathy, do you want to go ahead and try and put a sticky note up? Because it doesn't seem to be, oh, there we go. It's just taking longer to, okay. Oh yeah, scroll to board 3. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read some of these because I know that we're running low on time here. So we need the people in the room with kids to participate as well as district leaders. That's very important. And there's actually a section in the playbook on student engagement that would have to address that. I would like to see someone with a disability or someone who is a second language learner on the leadership team. I always think of the disability statement, nothing about us without us. Oh, I like that. Committed representatives from the school community with a broad demographic background. Parents, community members, they often have a lot of expertise as well as insight. Teachers, because they're doing the work with the students, and students because their voices aren't often included in, and that didn't, yeah, I would agree. Lots of good ideas here. We need the people in the, yeah, lots of good ideas. I believe we would need to incorporate both inside and outside persons because we need all stakeholders to have a voice in this. Otherwise, we will not acquire the information and the needs of those all. Very good, very good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and if everybody can now go to the next page. How will you approach the use of a facilitator and why? Okay, just make sure that you're posting to page 4, so you would be clicking on the top. Okay, so some of the things we have up here are a facilitator should have experience and have the following strengths: woo, empathy, activator, and individualization to ensure not to push naysayers away. Facilitator is a coach. They are not doing for us. They would be helpful to guide us through the processes and encourage us to take the risks that are required in this work. I believe through collective discussion, we can come up with the consensus of those persons most comfortable with leading in this capacity. An outside facilitator can be useful because the facilitator brings fresh ideas and perspectives to the table. The outside facilitator also doesn't have the personal relationships that might make it difficult for an inside person. I guess that's going to be someone on the inside. And we will develop key ideas to focus on. A facilitator should be experienced and learn when to step up and when to step back in the conversations. They should also be aware of their implicit biases. That's good points. There's a lot of really good points here on that decision about on facilitator decision. A lot of good points. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so when we are looking at the playbook, one of the other sections is teacher and staff development. Okay, and if you can imagine the banner across the top again about, you know, starting your engine and picking up speed and merging onto the highway, and then we would have once again over here the different things to click on. So when we're talking about teacher and staff development now, implicit bias is something that we all talk about. So here's a tool for in the playbook. Here's a section that talks specifically about what is implicit bias and cultivating equity mindedness. And at the bottom of this section is as we come down, are numerous tools that you could use in order to use when you are working with your faculty, when you're working with your teachers and staff. And I always want to make sure that we say staff, because we're talking about everybody. We're talking about the administrative assistant in the front office. We're talking about our paraeducators. We're talking about the bus drivers. We're talking about the cafeteria workers. We're talking about the maintenance crew. We're talking about all of the people that work within a district and are part of the culture of the district. Okay, so one of the things that I like about this, once again, are those reflection questions, because there's personal and institutional reflection questions. So it can be, this is taken at many different levels. There's one of the really good tools is the Western Education Equity Assistance Center, and on implicit bias, and then it looks at exploring the foundations of bias and what we can do to change it. There's also the, if you want to take action, these are courses up on the top. And specific tools is the John Lewis Jr. Implicit Bias and Debiasing. Californians for Justice, they're out of the East Bay. And they are an incredible website and have incredible resources. And it's total student engagement, student-led kinds of things. Very, very powerful site. And then there's, if you want to look at an assessment, there's Harvard's Project Implicit, where you can go online and you can take a test to see what implicit biases that you may have. Okay. Oh, and also Kathy, yeah, thank you, Kathy, for reminding me. Californians for Justice were also key contributors for the Ways to Equity playbook. They're incredible. In addition, if you want to do like a book read, there's equity literature that you can do with your staff. So we have, yes, you will have the list of, so here's some examples of some equity books that you could use. Other People's Children is a classic from Lisa Dalpit. White Fragility is another really, really good one. Excellence Through Equity. An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States. Excellent, excellent book. And this is Indigenous Peoples Month. So this might be something that you may want to look at. Is this more? Yes, all of this is in the playbook. A really good, excellent book for the classroom is Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. I know that I find that incredible information. These would be great book group studies to do with your faculty, and all of this is available from in the playbook on those links. And Kathy says we're also about to release the California One online course done in partnership with, who is that in partnership with? You want to tell us? No, she doesn't want to tell us. Okay, and where in the playbook is that in? Okay, Californians for Justice, thank you. When you are on the on-ramps in the playbook and you click on equity literature, it takes you to that page we just showed you. So that's why I say the on-ramps are incredible, because it takes you to all those tools. These are all tools with hot links. That's why you want to not just have the hard copy of the playbook, but you really want the electronic copy, so you can really maximize the playbook the way it was meant to be used. So all that information is in the playbook, and it's all linked. Any more questions on that? Okay, everybody got that, right? Everybody has that. Okay, fabulous. Okay. Okay, so here's another Jamboard activity for us all. This time we're going to be, there's the link. The link again is in the chat room. If you want me to put it in again, I can go ahead and put it in. Oh, we have it up, but let me go ahead and place it again in the chat room, the link, so that it's closer for everyone. And then we can go ahead. And this time we are going to go to page, what did I say, 5 and 6? Yes, page 5 and 6 this time. So how could you use current structures you have in place that would support professional development in equity? That's the first question. And then the second question is, what are some challenges? What are some of the challenges and opportunities that could be leveraged in your district or site to address implicit bias and equity with all staff? I'm a firm believer in looking at what resources you currently have in place and how can you leverage what you have to do the work that you need to do. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started reading some of these while people finish up typing what they're typing. So the teaching tolerance professional development is awesome. I have worked it into monthly PD meetings, part of our teacher evaluation process, and highlight positive examples of implementation in the weekly bulletins. Oh, that's great. Read the books or articles about implicit bias, culture, etc. to discuss in staff meetings. We have the occasional Friday PD days, few in number, and the Wednesday meetings every week. I like the idea of book reads with feedback, as in reflection, discussion, etc., as equity affects us all. Equity affects us all, whether it is quiet or screaming in the room. Good point. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next page because we're almost, okay. So what are some of the challenges and opportunities that could be leveraged in your district or site to address implicit bias and equity with all staff? A challenge is time, finding time to do the work as well as do our daily work. Good point. I know time is one of the biggest obstacles, not having enough time. What are some other challenges and opportunities folks would like to share? Time and place and creating a space for this need. And yes, a problem is not wanting to admit a problem. That's probably one of the most difficult obstacles. Anyone else have anything to share? It's very difficult to bring people in and along when they join the journey in different places. And I think that's something really that the playbook can help you with, because you're right, people do come in with different, everybody comes in with their own life experience. And I think that's the trick of doing equity work, is how do we take that and how do we use and leverage that to bring everyone along. Everyone is not going to be, it's not going to be where everybody reaches the finish line at the same. This is a lifelong process. And it's always important to keep in our minds that, you know, when we discuss equity for our students, you know, always keep that in mind when we're talking about the people that we're working with too. Which goes back to when Erica was talking about the use of protocols when you're doing equity work and structuring it so that there is equal voice. I'm going to go back to the other board and see if anything was added. Okay, we have some additions from the other board. So we're going back to the current structures. We have a department leadership team which meets weekly and regularly scheduled PD meetings driven by teacher and staff needs, all of which would support equity-driven curriculum. And then every site is doing its own thing. We could create some district-wide groups and then we could create that equity team. Okay. I'll put that on as a save. Trust in order to have the discussions. You need to have trust in order to open up and reflect. Yes. Equity also needs to be integrated within as a strategy rather than just a separate content piece on Tuesday as an example. Yes. Guys have incredible ideas and thoughts, and I can tell you this, you're very reflective on this topic, which is fabulous. Okay, let's thank you all for sharing, and I really appreciate it. Can we want to go back to the we can go back to Zoom. Oh, I like that for manual. Now it's time to plan the work and work the plan. Yep. Okay, so we're back in the Zoom in looking at the this next section, which is the data and the research. So it's really important when you are looking at doing the equity work Thank you, Kathy. She says that the recording will have all these Jamboard ideas listed on them. When we look at the data and the research, it's really important because using the data is essential to understanding the root causes of inequities and the intentional and unintentional systems that oppress certain groups of students. The data needs to be both quantitative and qualitative to paint the full picture of what is truly occurring in the district and in the community and in the classroom that contributes to inequities in the district and site. So completing a needs assessment across different groups will inform your decision-making from multiple perspectives. Cast a large net for stakeholders from the community and staff that usually are not part of the process, but have knowledge and perspective that is important to share and affirm and validate. Bus drivers, paraeducators, office staff, liaison, cafeteria workers, parents, community agency folks, churches, etc. The focus groups in the playbook are students who are African American, students with disabilities, and students who are learning English. Using the data at your district site may find that there are other groups of students who should also be a focal point. Decide what type of equity audit or assessment tool you will use at your district or site. And Erica showed you a group of those before, which are all available in the playbook. These are the ones she showed you before, and this is what I'm stumbling through as I'm talking right now. That these are tools that are available to you. Some are free, some are not. So just to let you know, okay. So when we look at the playbook, like we talked about before, we focused on African American students. We focused on students with disabilities, and we focused on English learners. And I know you just kind of scrolled through using data to inform equity. Can we look at that really quickly again? Just for a moment. So this section really, it talks about, data. And the idea is from 10 minutes. Okay, the idea is that you really do need to focus in on the data, because depending upon the people that you're speaking with, the data, you are really using that data to help inform you for your root cause analysis. And for some people, this may be the one way where you can bring them into the conversation. Okay, equally important is that qualitative data. And I really want to stress that, because collecting qualitative data in focus groups or in surveys and analyzing it really helps you learn more how the system is being experienced by the actual stakeholders. Make sure you're asking your students and make sure you're asking your families questions that you need to know information about. And once you've explored your data, develop a plan to take data-informed action steps towards equity. And it's, once again, it's that cycle. This is what we're planning to do, this is what we're doing, what were the effects of what we did, and then looking at that and then saying, okay, well, this is the next step. So you're constantly doing that cycle. Okay. Next slide. So this will be our last Jamboard, and we're going to only use about 6 minutes to do this one. So once again, this time we're going to be on Jamboard 7 and 8. And I will stick it in the link in again for everybody, so that's easy access. Oops. And the question, oh, what happened to my question? The question's gone. It's asking you how you would be using your data. Oh, there you go. How and for what purposes are or is your district or site currently using data? That's the question. Thank you. And then the other question, if you want to click on it, whose ever finger that is how can you reimagine using an equity lens differently on different types of quantitative and qualitative data, and give specific examples. Sorry about the typo one there. Go ahead to the other one. So you can answer either one of those since we're running low on time. I think the data question is really important because, as Erica brought up, there's a difference between compliance, using data for compliance and having compliance, and equity. And the best, coming from a special ed background, the best thing I can think of, I can talk about that is you may have a compliant IEP, but it may not necessarily be doing what it should be doing. Or in special education, all your ducks may be in a row and everything may be compliant, but you may be disproportionate. Good point. Data is prior and present, but not really futuristic. We really should be aware of where our clients are going after they leave us. We are using panorama surveys for students, families, and teachers in trying to gain insights into SEL, equity, and health. Okay. Oh, well, good point. Our data isn't that great this year. It's true. So I'm going to go on to page 8. How can you reimagine using an equity lens differently? I have to fix that. It's really bothering me. On types of quantitative and qualitative data, give specific examples. Integrate the use of more stories to capture the experiences of students and families. We cannot underestimate the power and legacy of storytelling that takes place in various cultural traditions. I agree. Counter storytelling, counter stories are incredible. The use of that, really empowering for students, really empowering for families. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm just going to go ahead. Oh, wait, one more. Made it under the gun, made it under the wire. In the most basic of ways, how do you feel about what do you remember when? What do you think about? What do you think should happen when? To get the present viewpoints, and how did we get to where we are? Good point. Good questions. As you said before, it's important to put faces, names to numbers. Each number is a person. I think we need to do more personal outreach to families who do not regularly respond. We need to fund home visits and phone call time and get better understanding. You know, it's interesting that you say that, because that whole building relationship piece is so essential, and it's difficult right now. But one of the high leverage practices is to collaborate with families. That I talked about for students with disabilities is to collaborate with families. And that home visit piece is one of those pieces that they talk about. I know right now it's kind of difficult to do that, but. Okay, thank you, everybody. These are great ideas. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to preserve these and use them. Okay, so this brings us to our end. I want to know if you guys have any questions before we go, questions that we can answer for you. Put them in the chat box. Okay, so Kathy says, hello all, since we're running out of time this network meeting, we will start with the data discussion next month. We would also like to get feedback from you all about what you would like to learn more about using the Ways to Equity Playbook. And there's our great ideas. Thank you, Kathy. So Julie talks about leverage, expanding learning partners. Many have a strong partnership and connection to families. And as Kathy reminds, feel free to write your questions into the chat and we will try to answer them at next month's meeting. Okay, so on behalf of Kathy, Angela, Kelly, Erica, and myself, I really would like to thank you all for coming today. And I hope this has been, this has left you with some food for thought and you will continue in your equity work. And we're here if you need us. So thank you all very much. Kathy, was there anything you wanted to say?
No, please feel free to contact us at inclusion@sccoe.org. And if you have ideas for next month's network meeting, please let us know. One of our goals is that we are able to network. So we obviously didn't have enough time this month, but we will do it again. So we'll see you in December. I believe the third Thursday is like December 17th, maybe. I'm just making it up. But anyways, please come back and see us. Thank you so much.